Hello and welcome. This video is going to be about configuring failover on an Untangle firewall. I'm already in an Untangle firewall here that has two WAN connections configured. I'll go to the dashboard real quick and just show you those. So we've got a fiber connection here from 123net and then a cable connection from Comcast on the WAN 2 interface. So the failover configuration is actually done through an app. It's not going to be in the config section as some of the other options are going to be. So we're going to go look at our apps, and we've already got the WAN Failover app installed here. But if you didn't have that, you'd need to install it, and you can do that by just hitting this Install Apps button. Now the WAN Failover feature is a licensed feature, meaning that you'd have to pay for a license for that feature, or get it in a bundle like the NG Firewall Complete bundle that includes all the Untangle apps. So if you don't have that subscription active in your Untangle, you're not going to be able to configure the WAN failover feature. So make sure that you're licensed to do that, and then we can go here to the WAN failover app to configure these settings. All right, so it's going to show us both of our WAN connections here, and it's going to recognize those based on how we've set them over here in our config. I'll show you that real quick, just so you know what shows up there. So anything that is in this list that is configured as is WAN equal to true is going to show up in that area. If you don't see an interface that you expect to see there, make sure that you come here first and have configured it as a WAN connection. Hop back into the WAN failover here. So I have two WANs here, again, like I mentioned, fiber and cable. It's going to show me the interface name and then my online status, whether they're currently able to be routed with traffic out to the internet. True for if that works, false if it didn't. And then the current tests and the test pass. You can see right now both of these connections are up. And that's important because this is the test by which the Untangle is going to determine which one of these connections is working and which are not. Right now we're in a good state because both are up, but if one was down, it will use the metrics that we'll configure to decide when to fail over to the other connection and then also when to fail back. So we're going to configure some tests here. And this is where we really kind of get granular on how the failover is going to work. So both of these interfaces are enabled for tests, and let's hit the edit button here to look at this one for the 123net fiber. So these are the out-of-the-box settings. They're pretty good. I don't recommend usually changing them. I will make one comment a little bit later here. So testing interval of 5 seconds, timeout of 2 seconds, failure threshold x3 of 10. So it has to fail 3 tests out of 10 tries. And the test type here is set to ping. This is an IP that we're going to ping based on this test. So this is a Google public DNS server. We assume that it'll be generally reachable pretty much all of the time. If Google DNS is down, there's usually big problems on the internet. So it's a pretty reliable thing to ping. I've seen some suggestions other people have made about pinging upstream ISP servers or things like that. I tend to go with something that's pretty global just to make sure that we're not going to get an incorrect result from, say, an upstream Comcast server that happens to be responding, but maybe the hop above that is not responding. This is usually a pretty accurate way to test. One comment on the test type. Usually we're going to see ping here. There is an HTTPS. There's also several different other options. An HTTP option. I don't recommend using this only because it can be a little bit spotty in terms of it figuring out whether the service has failed back or not. So when you fail over, you also need to fail back when that service comes back up. And HTTP is just a pretty inaccurate way of determining when something has come back. So I recommend always leaving this set to ping. And right now we can just run this test and it will tell us that it's successful. So that's an important thing, just to make sure that the IP address you're putting in here is actually pingable. If you had decided to put one in there that maybe wasn't pingable, wouldn't be a good way to test for your failover. So I'm just going to hit cancel here. So we've got tests configured on both of these WANs. Now, how does it decide which one is primary and which one is secondary? That is going to be by your interface ordering. So if we go back here to our dashboard, to our config, and then network, whichever WAN interface is ordered first, so I'm talking about the ID here, ordered first is going to be considered your primary WAN interface. So for the purposes of this, if you are, let's say in this case, we have a fiber connection, which we far prefer to our cable connection, we want to make sure that that is connected with an ID that's higher than the Comcast. You can see here my fiber connection is 1, my Comcast connection is 3. So this means my fiber interface is going to be my primary interface. Now let's say that these were hooked up exactly backwards just because of the way that maybe the installer hooked them up, or somebody was just plugging stuff into the firewall randomly, and Comcast was in the first slot here in the ID 1, and then the fiber was in, say, slot 3 or 4. That would mean that our other connection, our Comcast connection in this case, is our primary and the preferred interface. So we want to readjust the settings on these interfaces to make sure that our most preferred WAN interface is at the highest level in terms of IDs here, to make sure that it's the one that we prefer to use most of the time. Now, that'll take us back to another section that's very closely related to WAN failover, and that's actually the app called WAN Balancer. So we've pretty much gone through everything in the WAN failover. This isn't very hard to set up. There's not a lot to it. The main thing is about these tests and making sure the interfaces are ordered correctly, and then just making sure both of your WANs are configured for tests. So let me go back to the apps here and show you WAN Balancer. So WAN Balancer is where we decide what type of traffic goes out what interface. So in a typical situation where we're only using the second connection for a failover, where if our primary connection is down, we want to use that failover connection, but we don't want to use the failover connection for any routing of traffic when our primary interface is up. This is exactly what we'd expect to see here. So 100% of our traffic is going to be routed out of the fiber interface. And none of our traffic is going to be routed out of the Comcast interface. Now, in a situation where one of these two is down, let's say that our fiber interface is down, this will not continue to apply. So it will route traffic out of our Comcast interface if the fiber interface becomes unavailable. But when the fiber is available, we want to send all of our traffic out of it. And then this again is just a typical failover scenario where we have one connection we prefer to use all the time and another connection hooked up to the firewall, really to be used only in a case where the main or primary connection is down and unusable. So this is the WAN balancer right here. And then this is the status we looked at. Here's the traffic allocation tab. This is where we set the weights. So you could do 50-50, you could do 100-0, you could do 75-25 or something like that. You also have this tab called Route Rules, where you can specify specific types of traffic to be routed out specific WAN interfaces. So this could be useful if, let's say, that you have a guest wireless network and you want to provide internet to your guests, but you don't ever want them to have the possibility of compromising a lot of your bandwidth. Maybe you prefer to send your guests out of your Comcast connection because it's plenty fast enough for what they want to do, and that way they never touch your fiber connection and never have a chance to degrade your traffic. So you could write a rule here that said, I want to send all of my guest network traffic out of my Comcast interface. And this is the familiar box that we're used to in the Untangle, where we get to choose conditions and things like that. So I could say this is guest network, and the condition is if the destination address is a value like a subnet, let's say this, then the destination WAN is Comcast. So perhaps this is the definition of my guest network. All my guests are on this 192.168.1.0 network. Then all of their traffic is going to go out the Comcast interface. And again, this is just a great way to control those things at a firewall level. I'm not going to save this because I don't need to do that for this particular one. But that's a little bit about WAN Balancer and also WAN Failover. So as you've been able to see, this is fairly easy to configure on the Untangle. It actually works really well. Really, the only thing that we've ever run into in terms of a problem with this is when we had in the WAN Failover policy, in the test specifically, we had a problem where one time one of these tests was configured to use HTTP instead of ping, and then we just had trouble failing back. So in an instant where the WAN went down and then came back up, the Untangle wouldn't fail back properly. It would stay stuck on the second connection. So highly recommend you use ping for the test type. That's the most reliable option. All right, thanks for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it.